As always, the opinions expressed in this program do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of DKI APCSS, the U.S. Department of Defense, or the U.S. government.
We got to look at these countries, including Sri Lanka, as an independent sovereign nation. The feeling, the perception all along has been that, we are just treated as an appendage of a big neighbor. If somebody is visiting India, they come to visit us as an afterthought. It's about time we are not an afterthought. We are forethought. So I think that's something we have recognized, and I believe we are moving in that direction, whether it's with the Maldives or whether it's Sri Lanka or Bangladesh for that matter. Stop treating us like appendages of a bigger neighbor.
Aloha, and welcome to Dialogue, where conversation shapes security. I'm your host, James Minnick, Colonel United States Army retired and professor here at the Daniel K. Inouye Asia Pacific Center for Security Studies in Honolulu, Hawaii. It's a pleasure to have you join us for Dialogue 34, Sri Lanka's Tide Turns. Sri Lanka's November 14th election marks a historic turning point, breaking records and reshaping the nation's political landscape. Just 3 weeks ago, on November 21st, the new government officially took office, opening a fresh chapter in Sri Lanka's history. For the first time, a single party secured a 2/3 parliamentary majority under the proportional representation system. This extraordinary mandate grants immense legislative power, along with equally immense responsibility. The rise of the National People's Power Party brought unprecedented diversity to Parliament. Among its 175 first-time lawmakers are 21 women, 18 doctors, and representatives from a wide range of backgrounds, including marginalized communities. Particularly noteworthy is the inclusion of voices from war-torn regions in the north and east, areas home to Tamil and Muslim communities that have long sought greater representation. Their inclusion raises hope for addressing historical grievances and fostering reconciliation, but also highlights the complexity of uniting such diverse perspectives under one legislative roof. This election wasn't just about who won. It was about why and how, and why it happened, and what it signals for Sri Lanka's future. Voters decisively rejected long-standing political elites and instead rallied behind Anura Dissanayaka, the NPP's charismatic leader. Dissanayaka's grassroots organizing and pragmatic vision have inspired hope for a new era of reconciliation, economic recovery, and national unity. Yet the challenges ahead are steep. Economically, Sri Lanka remains in a fragile state, grappling with significant debt, inflation, and a $3 billion IMF bailout secured after the 2022 economic crisis. The new government must balance urgent reform with public expectations. While the NPP's supermajority offers the potential for sweeping changes, it also raises concerns about the risks of power concentration. Will this mandate strengthen Sri Lanka's institutions or deepen partisanship? Beyond economic issues, Sri Lanka's stability carries broader implications. As a strategically located nation in the Indian Ocean, its governance and policies reverberate across South Asia and beyond. The choices made by this new administration will not only determine Sri Lanka's domestic harmony, but will also shape its role in the region and on the global stage. This is a moment of tremendous potential and significant uncertainty for Sri Lanka. The government's ability to navigate this complex terrain, addressing ethnic reconciliation, rebuilding the economy, and ensuring good governance will define the nation's trajectory for years to come. Today we have the privilege of exploring these complex issues with Professor Shyam Tekwani, an expert in political violence, terrorism, media in conflicts, and South Asia's security dynamics. As an embedded photojournalist with the Tamil Tigers during Sri Lanka's 26-year civil war, Shyam brings unparalleled first-hand insights into the country's tumultuous history and its implications for its present and future. Shyam, welcome to Dialogue.
Thank you so very much, James. Always a pleasure.
Oh, I enjoy sitting down with you on any occasion, and our guests, no doubt, as well. Some of them will remember that you were here on episode 6, we for Power Play in South Asia, and then in episode 20, Modi's security outlook, or India's security outlook in Modi's third term. I wonder if you might tell us a bit about your story and maybe locate it a bit with your connections with Sri Lanka.
Yeah, sure. I think I made a reference to it in one of the earlier episodes, but just to refresh memory, I made my first trip to Sri Lanka way back in 1983. We're looking 41 years ago when the riots occurred in July. And ever since then, I've been, I'd like to say I've been not just an observer, but even a participant, if you will,
Yeah.
as a journalist first, and then as a researcher and academic later. I think the highlight of my time there, of course, was covering the conflict in the forbidden northeast zone as an embed with the Tamil Tigers, which was a predominant Tamil militant group fighting for a separate state. And to a large degree, my association with the island also goes beyond just covering the conflict. I mean, there were previous election campaigns in the 80s and 90s I was
Right.
part of, covering them as a journalist, reporting on them. So I'd say I would say it's 41 years since I first stepped foot there. Almost see it as home, the island. I've lived there for considerable stretches of time, both as a reporter, as a photojournalist, and even otherwise.
Yeah. Now that's that's rich background that few will have that type of perspective, and so it's great that we're able to sit down and have this discussion about what is no doubt a historical turning point in their history. And so maybe we might start then this discussion about this landmark supermajority, this 2/3 of representation of the MPP. And so I think the MPP took about 159 of the seats. Does that sound about right?
Yes.
Yeah. And so with that, let me just ask this question. What opportunities and challenges come forward with this type of mandate that they've now got?
Well, I think the first challenge I see is the JVP, which basically leads the NPP. The JVP is the Janata Vimuni Peramuna, which is a left-wing organization. Way back in the 70s and then the 80s, it led an insurrection against the state. In the 70s, it was primarily anti-imperialist socialist agenda. It was brutally squashed. And then in the 80s, the driving force was, again, it was anti-India to a good degree, because the Indians were involved there in the conflict in the form of boots on the ground, Indian peacekeeping force. So it was more Sinhala chauvinism in the 80s. The agenda was Sinhala chauvinism, and they were against the devolution of powers to the Tamil minority. And the first time around, it was, as I mentioned, anti-imperialist and socialist. And both times it was brutally squashed by the state. Especially the second round between 87 and 89, I was witness to that as a reporter and a journalist. I covered that in insurrection too. It was sometimes it's hard to say which was worse, what was going on in the northeast of the island or what was happening in the south of the island with the JVP. So it has always been branded, it was branded as a terrorist organization, revolutionaries, all the negative labels you can think of when any non-state actor goes against the state. In 1994, especially after the brutal killing of the JVP's leader, it became a political organization. It was mainstreamed way back in 1994. So what is interesting is when the JVP-led NPP won the elections, even to this day, if you looked at the headlines across the international media and even local media, when I say local, I'm speaking of regional media in South Asia, the one word that was often used to describe it, it's a Marxist party, it's a Marxist party. So it was already being branded.
Right.
So I think for the party itself and for the political outfit, it's got 21 small parties. It's a coalition. The National People's Party is a coalition of 21 parties being led by the JVP, from where Mr. Desanayake comes, AKD as he's known. So the first challenge is for them to, I guess, convince not just at least display and demonstrate to the international community, financial institutions, that the baggage that the term Marxist brings to them, it's more, I think primarily it's scaremongering, and I don't know if people who use that word are doing it deliberately or thoughtlessly, but it's a word, it's something that they have to live down. I mean, at least get rid of the perception that they are die-hard Marxist revolutionaries allied with China and all that stuff. So that's an important factor to consider as far as the political formation is concerned. They got to live that down. The other challenge, of course, is, as you just pointed out earlier, 175 is a number out of 225 in the parliament. Apparently, I would say more than 150 or so are newcomers, first-time parliamentarians. And so that's going to be a steep learning curve for some. When some had never been to the parliament before, it was the first time they were entering the portals of parliament, and there will be mistakes. They'll have to figure out how to navigate the bureaucracy. That's going to be another big challenge. You could lose your way and go astray, if you want to use that, because a lot of them are young, and I think and the age group is between 30 and 60. But for the first time parliamentarians, it could be awesome in the true sense of the word. Navigating through the bureaucracy is going to be a challenge for them. Not making mistakes. Mistakes will be part of it. The third one is the bureaucracies can be entrenched, and when you have bureaucracies which may want to go back to the old order, how are they going to deal with that? Are they going to really go after those that they see are impeding their policies and programs? I think that's going to be a tough one, especially I think anywhere in South Asia, dealing with the bureaucracy is probably one of the biggest challenges, especially for a young party. There's a lot of idealism, there's a lot of desire for starting with a clean slate, and they are bound to experience some frustration there. To what degree will they allow that frustration to either put them off from what they're doing or succumb to it is going to be a big challenge. And not to mention that the opposition parties, the elitists, the elite parties, they've been brushed away, but it doesn't mean they've disappeared. They're on the fringes, and they will look for opportunities to reduce the influence or at least the popularity of this party. And so those are the primary challenges, not to mention, of course, the real big ones that everybody is looking at: economic revival, accountability of the war, war dead, that's two, and then how are they going to deal with ethnic reconciliation as well as giving representation to minorities. Those are the real big ones that we are focused on from outside. But I think internally, how they're going to deal with the newness of the experience, and how they're going to deal with the parties who have lost but who are on the fringes and will look for every opportunity to undermine them, that's going to be very key. That's going to be a key. It's very easy to lose. I mean, it's granted that the numbers are really inspiring. The electoral victory numbers are very huge, but it's very easy for those numbers to dissipate into nothingness if you start making mistakes early on. And we have seen examples of that across South Asia.
Yeah. No. I think I want to pull, before we go deeper into some of the topics, I think I want to stay right here a little bit and let's pull a little bit on this inclusive representation, which you were just alluding to. I mean, without a doubt, the election had historic gains, and not just in numbers, 175 new out of the 225, but historic gains in diversity, inclusion of women, doctors, representatives from marginalized groups, as we spoke about. So here's the question now. How might this newfound inclusivity influence their policy making and then their priorities, the priorities that they're going to seek after? Maybe pull on that a little bit more.
Yes, they won in Tamil areas where the conflict happened, where there was a demand for a separate state, mostly in the north. They did not have much success in a particular province in the east, the Batticula area, which is actually fair representation of Sinhalese, Muslims and Tamils. They didn't make much of headway there, but the key places in the north, they did make much headway. So there is hope, and this is unprecedented for a southern party to make that kind of impact and electoral gains in the northern part of Sri Lanka. It's huge. It's very huge. And there are several reasons for it. Number one, the primary one I would suggest is the internecine I would say warfare between the Tamil factions out there. They've just reduced themselves to objects of ridicule. So there's impatience with that kind of thing. Going back to arms in the north is out of the question at this point, absolutely out of the question. So from their perspective, they saw it as necessary to give this new person a chance. He's not from at least this party, and they're not from one of those 5 big families that have reigned supreme in Sri Lanka right. since February 4, 1948. It's 77. It's going to be 77 years next year.
Yeah.
And so, in that sense, they have a huge opportunity to actually put all their efforts into ethnic reconciliation, and with all this representation that they have. And in terms of gender representation, we spoke about that. Again, another great opportunity to give more space and room for women in not just in the government, but even in society, in the armed forces. So I think if they went about, and I would imagine the chances of them doing, at least attempting to do what they said they will do, are very high, because unlike the previous parties, everybody pays lip service to reducing inequality, broad representation, anti-corruption, equity, etc., etc. But just because, and I think it's important to remember that's always the main goal of leftist parties, if you want to call it that. If you still want to call it that, that is. So I think there is I personally see a lot of hope in them actually addressing these issues of marginalized communities and the ethnic divide.
Well, let's go down a little bit further. Let's go to talk about reconciliation through representation. I mean, the inclusion of lawmakers from the war-affected Tamil and Muslim regions that you spoke about. I mean, this offers a chance to mend this deep societal division. So here's the question. Can greater representation from this region translate into meaningful reconciliation and healing for Sri Lanka? Does it do that?
It would, to a point.
Okay.
I mean, greater representation from marginalized communities and ethnic minorities, it'll go a long way.
Okay.
Especially, if you devolve power to these provinces, which has been a long-standing demand, devolution of power. That's one. But mere representation alone won't suffice. They will still have to address issues of accountability during the final stages of the war, and perhaps even before that. You have the issue of disappeared people who disappeared during the conflict and before. by the armed
Who
forces.
disappeared, right?
You pardon me?
Who were disappeared.
Yes, who
I
were
mean, that's what-
disappeared.
yeah.
Who were disappeared. So that's an issue. So just by having representation without accountability, without bringing to justice people who are clearly identified and named as perpetrators of the atrocities, if you want to call it that,
Yes.
that will go a long way. It's not enough. Just representation alone is not enough. The scars are still fresh. The wounds are deep. You got to address those also. And if you do that in tandem, that's a winner. Now, whether they'll be able to do it in tandem, that's going to be a big question, especially given the fact that if you're going to bring people, if you're going to enforce accountability in the military, that's a soft, sensitive issue. I don't know how they're going to do that. In the past, it's always been said, okay, it's not that we are against giving them, we are against devolving power to these provinces and to the minorities. It's just that we need to make sure all the people in the country agree. And on the face of it, that looks like a lame excuse, but it's also possible that the party will have to bring the country on board when it comes to devolution of power as well as accountability of the war crimes. And then along with that, if you have representation, it's hard to go wrong.
Let's talk a little bit about the end of the elites and the rise of these unlikely leaders. I mean, traditional political elites were swept aside. We often say that the incumbent is voted out of office, right? And this made room for these newcomers, including, as you've rightly noted, the former left-wing insurgents. So here's the question. What does the rise of these unconventional leaders signal for Sri Lanka's political identity and its stability?
Again, if they get it right, and if they're given a chance to get it right, I think it will be a very, very important turning point for the country.
Okay.
Especially, one of the biggest problems in Sri Lanka has been the issue of corruption. The venality is incredible. There has been, it's often, given my association with the island, I keep looking at, and I often say, the journey from Serendip, which was the early name for Sri Lanka, the journey from Serendip to Sri Lanka through Ceylon, and I'll come to that in a minute. From Serendip to Sri Lanka through Ceylon is a journey of lost opportunities, lost causes, and wasted opportunities. And I say that primarily because of the fact that from the beginning, from 1948, the policies were clearly defined and shaped to keep the minorities out, the ethnic minorities out. So there were many opportunities for resolution and to even prevent what happened. But I guess you could call it the majority arrogance, or probably the confidence that they could keep the minorities in place. And I thought there were several locations throughout its history where they had opportunities to actually reconcile and make space for to be inclusive, and many opportunities which were just spurned.
Yeah.
When I speak about lost causes, now whether it's the Tamil cause, which was a separate state, that was a lost cause. Now whether it was a JVP in the 70s and the late 80s to turn the country upside down, have a new kind of government, that was another lost cause. And from the government's old perspective, Sri Lanka was the first South Asian country to liberalize its economy in the 70s. And it could have been, for a while it was held as a role model, post-colonial country, modern, embracing a liberal economy in the 70s. And it was the envy of South Asia. The next country, I won't say the next country, but it was India opened up its economy 14 years later in 1991, and because it was forced to. So Sri Lanka had many things going for it. It became a real role model for the other countries, whether it was on issues of gender, whether it was issues of economy, etc. The only thing it did not have going for it was good governance, good leadership. And almost all the leaders, the 5 families I referred to from 48, it was essentially, if you look at all the policies, to a large extent, they were meant proactively to keep the minorities out of the system. So I believe that if this government really goes ahead with its pledges for ethnic reconciliation, aside from economic reforms, anti-corruption, and really changing the way the governance structure works, it's going to be very positive.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's well impressed on me what you've said. I mean, this is early days, and it represents opportunities, and there have been failures to seize opportunities in the past, and we can hope. The country, no doubt, hopes that.
Well, seizing an opportunity is one; spurning them deliberately is another two.
Yeah.
So we have seen both.
We've seen both.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, let's pull. Let's talk.
And can I just add one
do.
more?
Mm-hmm.
One of the challenges I said. Now, for instance, I'll give you 2 examples. After the war, the North was heavily militarized, so the militaries did take over possession of lots of land, etc. That's one. Number 2 was the Tamils were not allowed to either commemorate or remember the dead after the war, because they were automatically classified as you're going to, you're paying homage to tigers, the terrorists whom we killed. And over the years since 2009, every time in November, that's the day of the martyrs, the martyr day, November 26, 27, when the Tamils would go out in the northeastern parts to basically commemorate, they couldn't. The police would swoop down. They broke all the memorials of the Tamil fighters and the Tamil civilians, etc. When this government came to power, a couple of things that happened. November 14th was an election. November 26th or 27th is the Martyrs' Day, and where the Tamils commemorate the dead. So this year they were allowed to commemorate the dead. There was no police swooping down and scooping them away. Yeah. So that's a positive sign. The number 2, releasing some of the land that the military has been holding on to the rightful owners, for instance. So there was an effort in that direction too. And sure enough, promptly, one of the opposition party leaders, which was totally swept away in this election, he came out with a statement saying, hey, we have no problem giving back land, but it can't come at the cost of national security. So they're already creating a buzz where there shouldn't be a buzz. The fact, and it's a negative buzz. Basically, you're doing something antithetical to the interests and security of the country, giving back land to the Tamils. So that's the kind of challenge I was alluding to earlier.
Yeah.
Not just bureaucrats, but even the people who have been swept away from power. So they'll find ways, they'll continue. Anything that is in the direction of reconciliation or even accountability, you can be 100% sure that the opposition parties or even opposition members will use that to undermine the not the credibility but the goodwill that this political party has generated and won the elections, and making his task a little more challenging.
To give it a little scope, if I'm remembering right, Tamils are about 11% of the country, so they're a minority, and the Muslims are, again, like 9-10% of the country, are a minority. And so, it could be tough, in a minority group to be able to have the type of representation that brings about the issues that are important to you. And so, let's talk a little bit about, in January when we sat down and talked about, you and me, about South Asia power play, we spoke about all the elections that were going to happen this year in 24. And so here we are now in the closing days of 2024. And that's interesting to see how some of these things have turned out. But as we think about South Asia's democratic laboratory. I mean, Sri Lanka's election, I mean, it could serve as a model for democratic transformation in this region that is often marred by authoritarianism and instability. So let me ask you this question. What lessons can South Asia draw from Sri Lanka's political renewal, and how might this shape the region's democratic trajectory as we look forward?
Well, when you speak of democracy in the region, it's a term of contradiction.
Fair.
In the sense, you see more autocratic tendencies, more authoritarian tendencies, and democracy is often used just for the purposes of elections, which can be manipulated in more ways than one.
Yeah.
That's what we are witnessing in South Asia. But I think what happened in Sri Lanka is exemplar. I mean, I think the people of South Asia should draw inspiration from what happened in Sri Lanka, the elections in Sri Lanka. Now, whether we're talking of India, whether we're talking of Pakistan, and we just saw what happened in Bangladesh.
Yes.
Again, it was a people's revolt. We saw what happened in Sri Lanka 2 years ago. That was a people's revolt. I think ultimately, and I think it's a lesson. What happened in Sri Lanka in the elections, it's a lesson for political parties in South Asia. I think two things were clear. We saw Bangladesh, a leader who's been there, again, somebody who's been there for very long. Again, it's been primarily either two families contesting for power, or it's been the military. There was an interregnum period where the military was involved. So they're gone. She's gone. Sheikh Hasina was gone. In India, we saw Modi's popularity plummeting, not to the extent of having him out of office, but certainly to the extent where he had to scramble around to build a coalition.
Yeah.
And I would suggest that ultimately, when I speak of South Asia, I would suggest the people in these countries, big or small, take lessons from both Sri Lanka and Bangladesh that it is possible, and it's their responsibility to ensure that all the democratic parties which pay huge lip service to anti-corruption, to equality, to gender balance and gender representation, it's more lip service than actuality. It's more lip service than fact. There's greater inequality in most of these countries. I think in that sense, Sri Lanka should be inspiring for the people of South Asia.
Let's talk about then the challenges of governance, and you've alluded to this a few times. With many of these first-time lawmakers in Parliament, I mean, questions arise about their preparedness to address the nation's complex issues, and we've kind of talked a little bit about those issues. How can Sri Lanka's government ensure effective governance despite the inexperience of its new parliaments? What might they do?
Inexperience can be a good thing,
Yeah.
because you're seeing everything with a pair of fresh eyes. You're idealistic. You're serious about. I would suggest that you mean what you say when you say you want to do a certain thing. So that's a good thing. But and of course the bad thing, if you want to call it the bad thing, is you can get suckered by people who want to sucker you. The bureaucracy, for instance, or even vested interests who still have a firm grip in some aspects of the government. I think it's very important for the president and the prime minister, who's, by the way, the first woman prime minister, not in Sri Lanka, but without any connections to any families, and who came on her own steam. It's important to ensure that all the first-time lawmakers, all the first-time parliamentarians are quickly trained, and they could be sent off to be trained in places where they take democracy seriously, and also on the workings of parliament, etc. So I think training, you can't underplay the importance of training for first-time parliamentarians. It'll take a while. There are going to be lots of mistakes. Certainly there will be mistakes, and that's my fear, that these mistakes could sometimes cost them dearly. And these mistakes would be the exact kind If you have a series of mistakes and you have people from outside, vested interests and losers who are pounding on that all the time, it's very easy for all the goodwill that you've garnered to evaporate.
Yeah.
And we often say that's a honeymoon period, the first
Right.
3 months, after which, if there are vested interests and political opponents who keep hammering away at every little, it could be the simplest silly thing that you do. Like last week, apparently, the Prime Minister instead of saying People's Republic of China, just alluded to Republic of China, which basically caused a furor in the media out there.
Yeah.
Those kind of things can really play havoc if somebody is constantly harping on them.
Yeah.
And it's a small country, it's a small island, not as diverse and vast as India is, where you can have several echo chambers. In a smaller place, the echo chamber can become the dominant echo chamber, and that could hurt them if they don't quickly learn. And the one way to quickly learn is, of course, you try and get trained, number one, get exposed to it. Also, surely there are some honest and good parliamentarians also around still who you could learn from them. I think learning quickly is going to be a key.
Yeah. Yeah, no, learning is important. It's not just about not knowing, it's about there are those who actually will take active measures to keep you from governing,
Absolutely.
throwing roadblocks up and making it extremely difficult.
Absolutely. Even for the smallest mistake. And you can build momentum.
Yeah.
You could build momentum in a particular constituency, in a particular parliamentary seat. It can get messy if you're not quickly, if you don't learn quickly.
Yeah, yeah. Let's talk then. Let's a little about a different topic. Let's talk about economic reform in this new era. So the new government, inherit significant economic challenges, right? And this will test its ability to balance reform with public expectations. So let me ask you this: what strategies might Sri Lanka prioritize to address its economic woes while maintaining its public confidence?
Well, the first strategy the president already enacted, which was essentially, there was concern that with his Marxist leanings, is he going to relook the IMF loan, the bailout? Turns out he wasn't going to throw it out. He renegotiated it within a week of coming to power.
Yeah, that's right.
And I think he's on the right track there. He knows that that's the way to go. Build the country's reserves, cut down inflation. But I think then the bigger strategy for them is he's got to expand his network of countries with whom he can do trade and business.
Yes.
Just relying on India and China, the two big contesters in the region, alone will not suffice. And I think there's a good sense of that already. Markets in the EU, they already do business with Japan and the US, but there are other markets they should be looking at, whether it's the EU, whether it's the Africas, whether it's Latin America. So they've got to diversify and divest. They've got to find ways to bring back tourism numbers to pre-COVID levels, another important factor. So apart from ensuring that the deal with the IMF continues, and it's not going to be easy because the IMF loans come with severe austerity measures, and that's going to pinch at some point. Now, while that's inevitable, he's got to do that. He's got to find ways to expand his markets for exports as well as business, and also, more importantly, bring in foreign direct investment into the country in some of the industries. That's the only way they would be able to not just manage the economy but recover to the time when Sri Lanka was in a position to be called a rich small country. So that's going to be a long haul.
Yeah, without a doubt. To bring in foreign direct investment, you need confidence.
You need confidence, and that's precisely what I alluded to earlier. when you go around labeling it as a Marxist kind of thing, you're already prejudging, you're already putting them at a disadvantage. So he'll have to demonstrate that it's just a label which is clung on from the old days, but he's pragmatic,
Yes.
and that he'll have to obviously legislate policies that enable confidence to bring in foreign direct investment.
Let's talk about the global implications of Sri Lanka's elections. Its electoral outcome has drawn attention from the regional and global powers, right? The potential implications for its foreign relations. He's already been making trips. I think first trip was to India, right?
He's still in India,
yeah.
as we speak.
Yeah. Let me ask this question now. How might this election reshape Sri Lanka's role on the international stage and its relationship with key allies and competitors? What do you see?
Well, if the government went about its business of increasing equality, cutting down inequality, and going after the corrupt, going anti-corruption, also accountability in the war, if it checks all these boxes, it's going to build tremendous amount of confidence to the point that Sri Lanka, as seen as a smaller island state, it can actually become a leader of small states in South Asia. It could very well become the leader. It could, it's got tremendous connections to the global South, which is beginning to elbow more space for itself. It's a member of IORA, for instance, the Indian Ocean Rim Association.
Yeah.
The thing is, if Sri Lanka could become, if it does all what it said it will do, it could be at a point where it can be a leader for the smaller states of South Asia. It can be at a point where it can look India and China, the two big countries, and the US perhaps, in the eye and say, we are an independent sovereign nation, smell the coffee, wake up to the fact, and we will do exactly what our bigger neighbors saying, strategic autonomy. Whatever we do is going to be in our national interest. Stop bullying us, stop shoving us around, and start treating us as an independent sovereign nation and not as an appendage to a larger neighbor in the region. So I think it would definitely, if it sees this opportunity and did it right, it could definitely be a big leader, a leader of the smaller states in South Asia. And it's about time a country like Sri Lanka, when it was a role model in the late 70s and early 80s before the civil war erupted, it could hark back to the days where it could become the role model for other nations in the region. There's potential.
Yeah.
And I think there is hope too, as far as I see it.
No doubt there is great hope. I think the elections kind of are representative of the hope that people put into the parties. Let's turn to the audience questions. We have quite a few. Let's take this first one. Sri Lanka's global role. And the question is asking us, what is Sri Lanka's role in the current global political order and its international relations? So what does the point say?
Well, it's pivotal, given its given its strategic location in the Indian Ocean. It's very pivotal. The fact that you have two big countries like China and India coveting it, or even demanding to be heard more than the other. It's Colombo is a very probably the busiest transshipment port in the region. 80% of the oil trade in the Indian Ocean region, goes through the Indian Ocean region in Asia, and so it's a very pivotal geostrategic location. So that's not going to go away. It's been blessed with that location. That's not going to go away. So everybody will continue to woo it. So if that's the question, why is it important? Was that the question?
I mean, understanding what its role in the region and in amongst international relations, and I think you kind of speak to that. It has cards to play. It is strategically located. It is going to have both regional and global powers that seek to engage it, and Sri Lanka has to figure out how to
leverage it essentially
that,
for its own interests, for its own national interests. And I think that's been a problem all along. As I said, in spite of its strategic location and its importance as a strategic in the geostrategic calculations, it has not been able to leverage it much, simply because not because of its size. I mean, if size alone was the determinant, Singapore wouldn't be where it is today. It's governance. It's poor governance, and poor governance in Sri Lanka has led it to taken it to a place where it can be slapped around. And I think that's what it has to overcome. If they're able to have good governance there, it can definitely punch above its weight.
Yeah, now your example about what Singapore has been able to do with its strategic location, irrespective of its diminutive size,
absolutely.
Is a good example.
And Singapore was able to do it primarily because it learnt a lot from what not to do, looking at Sri Lanka. Whether it was ethnic polarization, whether it was corruption. Corruption is the biggest one, then the ethnic divides, and then meritocracy. I mean, these were the three key things that Mr. Lee Kuan Yew learned from Singapore. If you looked at his from Sri Lanka, if you want to punch above our weights, let's just not do what Sri Lanka is doing.
Yeah, no. This next question is asking about left-leaning trend, and so how does the rise of this leftist movement in Sri Lanka reflect the global South trend, and what are the implications for its democracy? And so this isn't just located in Singapore, right? I mean, so how does it reflect this global South trends?
Well, I think it's about time they were given a chance, simply because we have seen, we continue to see everybody talking about democracy and doing exactly the opposite, number one. And I think when we talk about left-wing parties or leftist governments, at least their focus is on what are their focuses? They want an equitable society. They want, and not to the extent of what the earlier revolutionaries wanted, but they're pragmatic. They want to minimize inequality. They want amity. They want prosperity and all that stuff. And that's a new kind of leftist we're seeing.
Right.
And how did this leftists come to power? They didn't come to power with guns. They were democratically elected.
That's right.
So I think that the time has come for us to shed all the connotations and baggages we may have around a label like leftist. I think that probably their heart is far more in the right place than people who speak about democracy and do the contrary.
Yeah, no, well said. This next question is asking us about government expertise. And so does the new government have the expertise and track record to deliver on its mandate? So we've talked about this a little bit already, there's no doubt. But maybe just pull a little bit further in that topic.
Expertise, it's hard. I mean, all of them are experts. And I mean, you mentioned earlier, there are academics, there are doctors, and what have you. It's a young crowd. They have expertise in their niche areas, but in terms of running a country, in terms of connecting the dots, in terms of having an overview and a whole picture, that's going to take some time. It's not going to happen overnight, and I expect there'll be mistakes. And in other words, none of them has expertise in a governing structure. Now, granted that you could always say that the JVP, the party which leads the National People's Party, they have some expertise in local governance because they're grassroots organizations.
That's right.
But we also know that expertise at a grassroots level, at a local level, does not necessarily translate to the national level because the pulls and pressures are different, the dynamics are different. But I would suggest that they are aware that they have to be quick learners, and they would probably turn to the right people for advice and guidance, and also get themselves trained. Sure, they do not have the expertise, that's a no-brainer, but how will they deal with the lack of expertise is going to be the real issue here.
This next question is asking us about geopolitical balancing. So, how does Sri Lanka balance its relationship with India while maintaining strong relations with China? This multi-alignment, how does it do it?
And I alluded to that earlier by improving its governance structure, by being in a position where it can go the way of India is. I mean, everybody is wooing India right now. And to the extent that India can stand and say, well, you have sanctions against Russia, but hell, we're going to buy the oil from Russia and despite the sanctions because it is in our national interest.
Right.
And we call it strategic autonomy. So I think Sri Lanka can achieve that too. I mean, they are in a position right now where China wants them, India wants them, the US wants them. And if they're able to get their act together, they should strike the same path, which is strategic autonomy, to the extent that they do not have to. I mean, ultimately, size will play some role, but not to the extent that it has been hitherto until all these years. I think it's in a great situation now. If they get it right, it's in a great situation to also stand up and say, hey, you know what, we're doing strategic autonomy too.
Yeah, no doubt. Again, we're in early days. We're going to get a chance to see how this plays out. This next question is asking us about U.S. foreign policy. So how should the United States engage with Sri Lanka's Marxist-leaning government to counter Chinese influence?
Well, first I'd say drop the labels, drop the baggage that comes with the labels. Look at it as we often do with every political party that comes to power through the vote on the street. We've looked at Pakistan many times. There have been people, or any country for that matter, not just Pakistan. There have been leaders who have been elected democratically, and that too with an overwhelming majority. Take it for what it is. Let's not get stuck on labels and baggage, number one. Number two, and I think we in the US have begun to recognize and practice some of it. We got to look at these countries, including Sri Lanka, as an independent sovereign nation. The feeling, the perception all along has been that we are just treated as an appendage of a big neighbor. If somebody is visiting India, they come to visit us as an afterthought. It's about time we are not an afterthought. We are forethought. So I think that's something we have recognized, and I believe we are moving in that direction, whether it's with the Maldives or whether it's Sri Lanka or Bangladesh for that matter. Stop treating us like appendages of a bigger neighbor. And I believe also when it comes to the issue of human rights violations and accountability, it's not something we can turn a blind eye to. And Sri Lanka has often spoken about finding a local solution to these issues of accountability. We'll do it our way, and most of us instinctively know what our way means. It's not up to the standards of international norms. I think we'll have to help them find a way to do it without it costing them political support. I think that's also critical. That's very crucial that we work with them together on issues of accountability primarily.
This next question is asking about Chinese investments. So what are the current operational statuses of the Matala Rajapaksa International Airport and the Hambantota port? I guess they're asking, are they still benefiting China?
Well, in the long term, yes. If you look at it as a long-term investment, certainly yes. But as a short-term goal, they've not fared well. They're not faring well. But the fact that China has invested in them, and I think the mistake the government of Sri Lanka probably made, at least the predecessors, the Rajapaksa family and all of them, was to pitch Hambantota and Matala Airport as something that would pay immediate dividends. I think that was where the problem. That's where the problem lies. But if they had pitched it the right way and been transparent about it, which is, hey, this is a long-term investment. It's going to take so much for us to develop Hambantota or Matla area, and we're looking at 25 years or 30 years or 10 years instead of saying we're looking at it tomorrow,
Right.
and which is why it's got a bad rep.
Yeah.
But I think as far as China's investments in these two places are concerned, for example, I think they're good investments and it'll pay off in the long term.
Okay. This next question is asking about, this will be our last one, I think, sustainable development. So what specific measures can promote sustainable development and stabilize Sri Lanka's economy?
Okay. I think the easiest answer would be to take the best practices of sustainable development from small island developing states.
Yeah.
That would be clearly whatever the best practices are related to whether it's the fisheries, whether it's the agrarian economies in the Northeast. I think it's very important. I mean, I can't specify this, that, but clearly we just had a workshop in September when we brought the small island developing states in the Indian Ocean region to look at issues of climate security. But beyond climate security, there are issues of sustainability, there are issues of economy, and there's much to learn from the other small island developing states. Not to suggest that there's nothing to learn from the other neighbors in the region, but I think there's more profit for them to learn from how countries in the small island nations in the Indian Ocean region are dealing with their issues. And I think it's being exposed more to how others are doing the job in terms of sustainability, not just in the small island developing states of the Indian Ocean region, in the Caribbean, in the Pacific Islands. And I think that would go a long way in helping them figure out ways to enact those same policies that will enable sustainability.
Well said. Shyam, before we say goodbye, I would like for you to take a minute to share with us some book recommendations.
Books again.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Frankly, there isn't really one single good book that has a comprehensive account of the island. I mean, there are many brilliant books which talk about certain issues, but not comprehensively.
Okay.
However, I'll recommend two, and they're both in the nature of a travelogue, but with great insights, well researched too. One is called Return to Sri Lanka, Travels in a Paradoxical Island by Razin Salih. The other one is called This Divided Island by Samant Subramaniam. Also a good travelogue within the island, but very profound, not profound, but very sharp observations and analytical context. In my own experience, the best way to discover and learn about Sri Lanka is through its fiction, through its literature. And I mean, I've got a couple of them that I would really like to mention. One is a book called The Seven Moons of Mali Almeida. This one a booker, not that the booker means much, but it's a great book to read. And there's another one called Anil's Ghost by Michael Ondaatje. He's a guy who also wrote The English Patient, which won a Booker. Two great books on its fiction and literature. And then there's another one, it's not fiction, it's on ethnic conflict, ethnic politics in Sri Lanka. It's called Reaping the Whirlwind by Dr. K.M. De Silva. This came out about 25 years ago, but it's still pertinent, relevant, if one is interested in knowing what exactly led to the ethnic conflict in the island.
Thank you for those recommendations, and thank you for sitting here with us for the hour. We're all better for having had this discussion. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you so much, James, and I wish everyone out there Happy New Year and season's greetings. You can see James again next year. Over to you, James. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, as we conclude today's dialogue, Sri Lanka's historic election presents both great opportunities and challenges. The decisions ahead will determine if this moment becomes a true turning point. These conversations shape security. So join us in January as I speak with Dr. Lami Kim on Korea's martial law fallout and with humanitarian advisor Jonathan Robinson on Indo-Pacific humanity and geopolitics. from all of us at DKI APCSS. Thank you for joining this important conversation. I'm James Minnick, and until we meet again, aloha oe. As always, the opinions expressed in this program do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of DKI APCSS, the U.S. Department of Defense, or the U.S. government.